Thank you. Any objection to Government's Exhibit
Your
35?
Honor, I've never seen this exhibit before. It was not on their exhibit list. I don't know where they got it.
Your Honor, I'm something I printed off the Florida Department of Corrections website this morning regarding their educational programs.
Okay. You want to have a moment to take a look at it?
I don't know where it came from, and I'm not sure that Mr. Talent will know where it came from. There's no way for me to verify this now. It wasn't on their list.
Your Honor, it's the website location is clearly printed at the bottom, along with the date that I printed it out just this morning.
Your Honor, I mean, Mr. McGatt can't authenticate this document.
Okay. But for the purposes of this hearing, is there any indication that the website is not a state website? It's a matter of public record?
I don't know that. I mean, I can't verify this. I didn't have it earlier to be able to look it up and see where it came from or when.
Your Honor, I think that it's well within the context of this hearing as a preliminary injunction hearing for the court to be able to take judicial notice of this, particularly because it's available on the state's website.
Well, for taking judicial notice, there's usually a requirement that one give notice to the other side and that they have an opportunity to respond as to whether or not it is something about which I can take judicial notice. And quite frankly, off the top of my head, I don't remember what the law is as to the court's ability to take judicial notice of what's on the internet without doing some quick research.
That's fine, Your Honor. And frankly, Your Honor, for the purposes of this cross-examination, I don't necessarily need to have the exhibit into evidence. I just want to ask Mr. Talent some questions, and he seemed to be aware, for example, that they did offer certain programs. So I can continue to ask him questions in that vein.
Okay, for the purposes of this hearing, I will go ahead and identify Government's Exhibit 35 for the record so that it is, and we will make it an exhibit so that it is clear that this was the item that you were discussing. You can ask him questions about it, but I will keep in mind that we are dealing with something that has not been authenticated.
That's fine, Your Honor.
And I will weigh it accordingly. If it's not authentic, the question is really, are we sort of off in a speculative area?
I understand, Your Honor. Mr. Talent, you don't have any reason to believe that the state of Florida doesn't offer plumbing technology courses, do you?
I'm not sure what the courses they offer.
Okay. Do you know how much money it costs the state of Florida to offer these types of programs? And this document says it costs $22 million. Do you have any reason to dispute that?
I have no reason to dispute that.
And some of these programs are required by state and federal laws, isn't that correct?
I believe some of the special education, yes.
But not all of them are required by federal law.
That would be correct.
Okay. And there's some significant staffing required in running your educational programs, isn't there? Let me rephrase, Your Honor. You have to allocate staff to running the educational programs, isn't that correct?
We are appropriated staff to run education programs.
Okay, and the number of staff, for example, on this document says it's 300 full-time equivalents. Do you have any reason to dispute that that's the number of full-time equivalents that you use in your education programs?
I do not.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay. Any redirect?
Mr. Talent, the positions in education, they're not required by statute. Are they available for to hold open and vacant?
Yes, and we do hold them vacant.
Okay. Do you know? I'll strike that question. No other questions, Your Honor.
Okay. Is this witness released?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Talent. Have a safe trip going back. Hopefully the weather is nicer in Tallahassee.
It's heading that way.
Just a minute, Cindy. Okay, your next witness.
Alex Taylor, Your Honor.
Okay. If you would remain standing until you're sworn. Okay, please have a seat. Make yourself comfortable. There's water in that pitcher. If you would please state your full name and slowly spell it so the court reporter gets it down correctly. It also gives you an opportunity to test the sound system because it is a challenging one. It was provided by the lowest bidder.
My name is Alex Taylor, A-L-E-X-T-A-Y-L-O-R. I serve as the Chaplaincy Services Administrator for the Department of Florida Department of Corrections. I have served in this position since June of 1999.
And what does that mean, that you are serve in the chaplaincy service?
I advise the department on religious issues. I serve to provide guidance in programs and religious issues to the field as well concerning religious matters as it pertains to the beliefs and practices of inmates in the Department of Corrections.
Okay. Prior to coming to the Department of Corrections in 1999, where were you employed?
I was employed with the Texas Department of Criminal Justice from 1984 till 1999.
And in what capacity?
I started as an institutional chaplain at the Ellis Unit in Huntsville, Texas, and served there for 10 years. In April of 1995, I moved into administrative chaplaincy as a regional chaplain and served there until I came to Florida.
Chaplain Taylor, are you familiar with the Jewish Dietary Accommodation Program?
Jewish Dietary Foundation Program?
Accommodation program.
Oh, yes.
Was that the department's program back in 2004?
Yes,
for
that's
kosher
correct.
diets? Okay. Did you serve on a study group in 2007?
Yes.
Okay. Now, the study group studied a number of things or reviewed a number of things in that program in 2007, didn't it?
Yes.
Was one of the things that it reviewed the impact on the operation of, or the operations or of the chaplaincy services
Yes.
office? Okay. And how was the chaplaincy services office affected by the JDAP?
The chaplains in the field, which are a limited resource, but they were tasked with the process of interviewing the inmates as they came into the program, keeping track of those inmates that are in the program and supplying that information to the food services in conjunction with the chief classification or classification officer. They made the decisions and recommendations on who was in, and they helped keep track of the process of inmates that were leaving.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Certainly. If you're going to show him something, make sure you show opposing counsel first. But show opposing counsel at first. It saves you the trip up and back.
Study group report. It's fine.
Okay.
Yes.
So what you've shown him is government's exhibit
Six, Your Honor.
I mean,
Yes.
2, and the defendant's exhibit 6. Why don't we just call this the joint exhibit?
Okay.
Okay.
This is the final report of the religious study group, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Would you turn to page 10 of the report?
All right.
And in the report, what did the study group find regarding enrollment events related to the program?
The paragraph 3, which reads, of all inmates enrolled, over 500 inmates have voluntarily withdrawn from the JDA program.
But what about the enrollment events?
Ms.
Okay.
Mayor,
Of all the inmates enrolled, over 500 inmates have voluntarily withdrawn from the JDA program since May of 2004. Of that number, 489 remained in prison after withdrawal. 90 of those individuals changed their religious preference to something other than Jewish following withdrawal. Currently, the majority of inmates participating in the program have registered their religious preference as Jewish. 13 of the total number of inmates participating in the JDA program officially claim a religious preference for a religion other than Judaism.
In paragraph 2 of the report, does it indicate how many actual enrollment events there were?
Yes, the number is indicated here. There have been nearly 1,170 enrollment events since the program was launched.
Okay. And what did the enrollment events include?
As mentioned here, they are the process of admission into the program, involuntary removal, voluntary withdrawal, reassignment, death, or release from department custody.
Did those enrollment events involve chaplaincy staff in most of the instances?
Yes.
Okay. And would most of the events involve staff in addition to the chaplaincy staff?
That is correct.
and so what happens, for example, when there's a death? What does the staff do?
The chaplains, by and large, are involved in any inmate death, but when the inmate is also involved in a diet program, then notification has to go to food services for that inmate's name to be removed from the special diet list.
And how is that done?
Well, it's done in a couple of ways, depending on the chaplain's knowledge level, the availability of it can be done through the department network services, but it's also done through memos. We do a written memo, a typed out memo, so that we have a document of record that is kept that they were notified.
And you can't send a document of record by computer?
The answer is that it's not that it can't be done, it's that we developed the technology rather slowly, and so there are many institutions and individuals that feel comfortable with a hard copy. And in addition, we're also checked when it comes to our accreditations with hard copies that are produced. So it may not always be required, but that's the comfort level that is frequently demanded, is that a hard copy be in place.
Okay, and the accreditation services are not looking to assist corrections institutions minimize administrative labor by using technology?
And I can't speak for that, but I haven't seen anything that indicates it.
Sounds like the accreditation service needs to get, but then make no comment. The ABA is not as proactive as I think they should be for law schools either.
Chaplain Taylor, is there some budget constraints on how much equipment you get, including computer equipment in chaplaincy services?
Yes.
Do all institutions have as many computers as they need to do their jobs?
In this, I can't speak for all institutions. Generally, the answer is no, but we do make a very concerted effort in my office to make sure that they have workable equipment.
These other events, such as admissions or involuntary removals, all of those require notification to other staff, correct?
Right.
And then other staff will have to do things in other areas to accomplish the end goal, either putting someone on the program or taking them off.
That's correct.
So for every event, what would be a reasonable amount of time to estimate by the time your staff process an event and the other staff that might be used?
There's a certain level of variance in chaplaincy competency, but giving at least an hour per event is reasonable.
That would include other staff, though, processing the paperwork, correct?
Yeah, oh, definitely. If an hour is then conservative.
Okay. So if you looked over the 3-year life of the program and those number of events, that would be roughly amount to about a half a year of staff time just in the 3 years, correct?
That's correct.
I'm sorry, that was a leading question, and I need for the witness to explain how you arrived at your figures.
Well, 1,170 events would be 1,170 hours.
That's correct.
Okay. How many work hours in a year, do you know?
2080 rather. 2080.
So it's roughly a half a year, correct?
That's correct.
I'd like to show the witness exhibit, Defendants Exhibit 1.
Thank you.
This is Mr. Taylor's declaration,
It is.
docket entry 35-2. Okay.
Now, Chaplain Taylor, do you recognize that document?
Yes.
And what is that document?
This is an affidavit or a declaration that I provided concerning the number of inmates and potential number of participants in a religious diet program.
And as part of that declaration, were you asked to obtain statistical information on the number of inmates in the department who identify his or her religious faith to be one of the 8 major religions whose dietary laws include being kosher?
Yes.
And what are those religions?
Jewish, Muslim, Nation of Islam, otherwise NOI, abbreviated to NOI, Messianic Jewish, Hebrew Israelite, Seventh-day Adventist, Muslim Sunni, Muslim Shiite.
And when you say keeping kosher, do you mean certified kosher or just keeping kosher?
Is that to me? Yes, ma'am. Kosher, what we used with these were that kosher meets the dietary needs of a number of religions. They wouldn't call it kosher. For example, the Muslims wouldn't call it kosher. But kosher production meets their basic needs of the way in which the animals are processed, if they're meat, and the way in which the foods are prepared. And so all of these groups have certain dietary laws that would be accommodated with a kosher diet, though they themselves would not be claiming the necessity of a kosher diet, but their food requirements would be such that kosher, the way that kosher diets are done, would meet their obligations as well.
Okay, so when you are saying keeping kosher, it's simply the way the food is prepared, and you're distinguishing, that's a broader category than certified kosher, where a rabbi supervises and certifies that it is consistent with keeping kosher?
The term kosher is specifically applied to those that adhere to Judaism and Messianic Judaism, and that's a term that they prefer. And so we do apply that because that's the restrictions, or that's the particular diet we're looking at.
No, I'm sorry. Keeping kosher involves not mixing.
Yes.
And when I'm distinguishing that from where you have the food preparation under the supervision of a rabbi. I mean, you can keep kosher without having a rabbi there to certify that you're keeping kosher and that everything is done. Correct? And that's what I mean is certified kosher.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what the question is still, ma'am, but there is a distinction between the institution and the home. And a certified kosher, like their certification for a home, I don't know that the Jewish home is certified, but yet they keep kosher.
Correct. And that's, I think we're on the same wavelength. Are you talking about keeping kosher, for example, as it is in the home, or are you also saying that keeping kosher is as actually certified by a rabbi? Because the rabbi does not certify that keeping kosher in that the family's meal preparation has been consistent with kosher. I mean, it's left up to the adherents of the faith, correct?
I don't disagree with you, ma'am. I'm not sure what you're asking me, though.
Well, what I'm asking is, when you came up with this number and are keeping kosher, are you treating it as simply those who want to ensure that certain things are not mixed and they eat in a certain way, they don't eat pork, or are you also saying that all of these individuals would be ones who would require a certified, that the meal preparation was certified by a rabbi?
I understand. I believe I understand. Okay. And what I would say with this is that the higher standard of the food preparation is the kosher diet. And in its higher standard, the way in which meats and dairy products are mixed are paid attention to, as well as the way the animals are prepared or slaughtered in the process of food preparation. Many of the other groups don't have the same standards for some of the edges of kosher. So they're not keeping kosher per se. However, the kosher food that we would supply would meet whatever their requirements are, okay, without violating their dietary.
Okay.
Chaplain Taylor, what time frames did you use in creating the statistical information?
We simply took a reading from the department information on inmates at the beginning of the year, prior to any announcement concerning the department's decision to move towards a kosher provision, and as dated here, April 19th of 2013.
Okay. And the beginning of the year date was what date?
January 4th, 2013.
Okay. And how many inmates were in those religious categories, those 8 major religious categories, on January 4, 2013?
On January 4, Jewish, 1,738. Muslim, Muslim, 3,187. NOI, or Nation of Islam, 604. Messianic Jewish, 651. Hebrew Israelite, 1,722. Seventh-day Adventist, 375. Muslim Sunni, 149. Muslim Shiite, 16.
Is that a total of 8,442?
Yes.
And how many in those categories as of April 19th, 2013?
You want me to go through the numbers again?
Please.
On April 19th, 2013, number of Jewish inmates were 1,815. The number of 1815. Muslim inmates, 3,187. Nation of Islam inmates, 599. Messianic Jewish, 730. Hebrew Israelite, 1,800. The printing is a little blurred here, and I believe it's 1800 total. Seventh-day Adventist, 389. Muslim Sunni, 145. Muslim Shiite, 17.
Is that a total of approximately 8,691?
Yes, that's correct.
Are these figures for all institutions, including private institutions?
Yes, these are all the inmates that are in the...
That would include work release facilities and work camps?
Yes.
What changes, if any, were there between January and April 2013 in the composition of those categories? Was there an increase or a decrease?
Increase, by and large, other than the Muslim Sunni, where there was a decrease.
Okay.
But isn't the Nation of Islam also a decrease? Although on your affidavit it is indicated is
Yes,
a
that's
projected
correct.
increase.
That's correct. A decrease in the Nation of Islam.
What was the overall increase?
I've listed here a percent increase of 1%.
1% overall between January and...
The increase in the total population was 1%.
But what
in
about
each of
the
the
increase in the
categories.
categories?
Okay, in each of the categories, the Jewish increased by 4.5%. The Muslim increased 0. Nation of Islam increase, or was actually a decrease of 1%. The Messianic Jewish was an increase of 12.3%. Hebrew Israelite was a 5% increase. Seventh-day Adventist was it looks like a 12%. I don't think. The Muslim Sunni was a negative, a loss of 2.5%, and the Muslim Shiite was a 0.5% increase.
Do you know what the overall, if you average those out, what it would be?
I know I've worked out the figures, but right off the top of my head, no.
Now, the department adopted a new procedure recently, didn't it, to expand its religious diet program to include a certified food option for kosher meals?
That's correct.
Now, there's a procedure and form attached to that declaration in Exhibit 1, isn't there?
Yes.
Okay. Are those the procedures that the department initially promulgated for this program, this new program?
This is the April 16th effective date.
Was that the first procedure that they promulgated?
Yes.
Those two?
Yes.
And how was it promulgated?
It's processed through the department. We look at it, legal reviews it. It goes through the secretary's approval, and then it's put out into the institutions onto our intranet.
So it's on your intranet?
Yes, ma'am. Which makes
When
it
you say
available.
intranet, it is the INTRANET?
That is correct.
And that is internal to the department?
Yes, ma'am.
It's not on the website for the public, is it?
That's correct.
And who has access to the intranet in the prison system?
Well, throughout the institutions, all the institutions, it's available in every law library. So it would be available to every inmate too. They produce a copy in all the institutions for the inmates when new procedures come out.
And how does it disseminate it to staff?
The staff have it online through the intranet, and so we have a section procedures, and it's dated as a revision, newly available, and they can pull it up wherever there's a computer outlet.
Okay, and when was this put on the internet?
April 16th of this year.
Okay. And do you know what caused the increase, for the most part, between your January 4, 2013 and your April 19, 2013, which was 3 days after this was put on the internet?
And you're talking about the increase in the number of inmates in the various categories of religion? I can't say that I know. I have suppositions, but that's all they are.
Okay.
Chaplain Taylor, when was the department's intentions to move forward on a kosher diet program known before the policy was promulgated?
Yes.
And was it known by the inmate population?
Yes.
How do you know that?
Well, the inmates began to write us and ask to be included on various grievances and letters, and we got word from the chaplains saying that what's going on, we've got all these inmates asking, and just in the institution, the information circulates. And so we were getting feedback from the institutions that we were starting a program. And I believe it also appeared in the department, in the news, when this particular legal action began. It was all over the department right away that we were moving towards a kosher provision.
So you're saying that when this action was filed last August, it was all over the prison system that you were moving forward with this program?
It wasn't yet. Well, it was well known throughout the department that something was happening, but I don't believe I'm not certain of when the date was exactly, but it was after the first of the year that it became known. The department announced that they would provide, and it was at that point, it was also public news, that the department was going to address this by providing kosher for the inmate population.
And how was that information disseminated?
I think it went out in the news in a press release.
Oh, by the department?
Yes. I believe that's correct.
And inmates read newspapers, do they not?
Oh, yes.
First I'd like to move that Exhibit 1 into evidence, Your Honor.
Well, hasn't he just testified to everything in the evidence?
It's the attachments, and we can remove the declaration. I'm more interested in having the attachments in evidence.
Okay, well, for the purposes of this hearing, is there any objection to the attachment? I believe that the government's position was that there was no objection.
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay. So the attachment to Mr. Taylor's affidavit is admitted. No objection.
Has the procedure changed since its initial adoption? And I believe it was adopted effective March 22 based on that, and then maybe disseminated thereafter. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Has it changed since that original adoption?
Since the March 22 date?
Yes.
Yes.
And how has it changed?
We met with the staff at Union Correctional, and
Why did you meet with the staff at Union Correctional?
To discuss how this would be implemented, and to help to teach them or answer their questions on what was going to be expected of the program.
Is Union the test institution for this rollout?
Yes.
And what was the result of that meeting?
The staff that processes the inmate requests and inmate grievances, both formal and informal, they had recommendations to make that were specifically for operational end of it, how to make this thing work so that they would be able to address it appropriately as it processes through and becomes fully operational.
Excuse me, and when did you meet with the staff at Union Correctional?
It was before April 16th. It was about, I believe it was not, I mean, not before April 16th, but it was before the, I'm sorry, I don't recall. It was early on, before we had, I believe it was just before the April 16th date is why we came out with the second or the first revision, the pen and ink. We met with the staff and we talked with them about it, as they had a early April implementation date. And so before it was in the, let me back up, in the March 22nd procedure, I believe we had an early April implementation date where it would start, we would begin taking applications from inmates at the institution. And so that week we met with the inmates, or we met with the staff, and we discussed the procedure in a round table. And as a result of that, shortly thereafter, we incorporated changes, pen and ink changes as we call them, to the original March 22nd document.
Okay, so exhibit number 1, defendant's exhibit number 1, which is the attachment to your affidavit, is that the initial document or is it the revised document?
This would be the revised.
Okay.
I believe that's correct.
With the pen and ink changes.
Yeah, right, pen and ink, right.
Were there other changes that were made to the procedure since its initial adoption?
Yes.
And what were those changes?
Those were changes that affected the sincerity testing. We had a sort of a two-step process. Do you want explanation?
Well, what was the two-step process?
Two-step process started with a sincerity assessment where the inmate filled out basic sincerity questions. What religious beliefs require this, and how can we currently meet your religious obligations, dietary obligations, with the available alternate or vegan diet, and what specifically do your religious beliefs require? And that was the first part where the chaplain did the interview. The second part was to enter into a period of time in which the inmate evidenced sincerity or contributed to his sincerity assessment by observing the current religious diet, which was vegan or alternative no meat entrees.
And has that second part of the process since been removed from the procedure?
The testing period, yes, has been removed.
Which testing period? The initial testing period?
The initial test was an interview with the inmate. And then once through the interview with the inmate entered into a time period where his canteen purchases and food from the menu would be recorded or observed. And violating those could result in being removed from or gain denial of the RDP, the Religious Diet Program.
Okay, Mr. Taylor, what I'm trying to find out is that you said the testing was removed. Are you talking about the initial interview with the chaplain, or are you talking about the initial testing as to checking of your canteen purchases, or both?
No. The initial interview remains.
Okay.
The testing period, that is the observation period, prior to being approved for the diet, that's been eliminated.
Okay, and has that been, has the exhibit number 1 to your affidavit been modified to reflect that, and has that been promulgated?
Yes,
and if so, can I have a copy of that?
We're about to do that, Your Honor.
Okay.
Okay. I'd like to give the witness Defendants Exhibits 10 and 11.
Thanks.
Okay. Defendants Exhibit 10 and 11 are admitted, no objection, based upon the government's position in the past.
Okay. Chaplain Taylor, what is Exhibit number 10?
It's the most recent 503006 procedure on religious diet program.
And what was its effective date?
May 22nd.
And what is Exhibit 11?
Exhibit 11 is the interview sheet, the assessment sheet, the initial interview.
And it was effective on the same date, May 22, 2013?
Yes.
Okay. Does the inmate sign an agreement with regard to participation in the program?
Yes.
Okay, would you look at form number, exhibit number 11, the assessment sheet? And is the agreement reflected on that sheet?
Yes. Yes.
And where, can you direct the court to where that is?
Approximately in the middle of the document on the front page, the section that's in bold, inmate.
Mm-hmm. And what does it say?
By signing below, the inmate understands and agrees to participation in the CFO program. I agree to not purchase, possess, or consume any food that is not consistent with or that specifically violates the standards of the diet requested regardless of the source of the food. 2. I agree to eat only the CFO and only purchase from the approved RDP canteen menu. 3. I understand that failure to comply with the conditions above will result in a denial to participate in the CFO. My signature indicates that I have read or have had this document read to me, and I understand this statement.
Are there consequences if the inmate fails to abide by that agreement?
Yes.
And what are those violations? You might want to look at Exhibit 10 at page 6.
Well, it's also on page 2 of Exhibit 11.
Okay, that's fine.
Item number 2, under inmate, by signing below, the inmate understands and agrees. Number 2, I agree to not purchase, possess, or consume any food that is not consistent with or specifically violates the standards of the diet requested regardless of the source of the food, and understand that violation may result in suspension or removal from the CFO. A, first violation will result in a 30-day suspension from the CFO. B, second violation of the religious diet will result in a 120-day suspension from the CFO. C, third violation of the religious diet will result in a 1-year removal from the CFO. D, fourth and more violations will result in a 1-year removal each time.
And what is the purpose of imposing such sort of temporary removals from the program?
The removals are not meant to be punitive in nature. We didn't revise the inmate disciplinary code in order to bring these about. Only punitive is what currently exists when inmates go to bartering food, which is the same problem for any bartering that goes on when they're not supposed to. These are intended to provide us an opportunity to assess whether or not the diet that they voluntarily entered into and indicated a certain sincerity level to take part in, whether or not it's appropriately meeting their dietary needs, and whether or not it's appropriately being distributed by the department. It is, since there are limited resources that the department has in terms of its ability to produce ad infinitum the things that cost us money.
And if there are no consequences for noncompliance with the diet program, does the department feel that the integrity will be compromised?
Yes.
In developing this part of the procedure, did you research how the other states and maybe the Federal Bureau of Prisons handled violations of their respective religious diet programs?
Yes.
Okay. And what did you do?
For a number of years now, I've belonged to a listserv of religious administrators throughout the country. And we compare lots of questions about religious provision. Kosher diet comes up quite regularly, or a number of different religious food issues come up, kosher diet being one of them. I also go to the websites of the different departments of corrections or talk to the religious administrators and get their copies of what they currently have going on. And so I compare those and look at how they can apply to the Department of Corrections in Florida.
Your Honor, I'd like to show the witness Defendants Exhibit 8.
Okay. And just, Mr. Taylor, if you would be so kind, just walk through once again. The chaplain sits down with the inmate, or the inmate fills out exhibit number 11, the sincerity assessment portion, and then the chaplain sits down with the inmate and goes over this, I presume goes over the page number 2, which is DC 5-324, page 2. And then the chaplain or his or her designee then fills out the bottom.
Yes. We essentially want the inmate to know, have familiarity with everything that's on this sheet. So there's a certain orientation that takes place. We also, from experience with inmates, they bring to the table varied levels of penmanship, both in their writing skills, and some don't have any. So it's a combination of an interview and the inmate fills in the blanks. We try to work with them as much as possible. Sometimes we get documents we can't read. Sometimes they can't write it appropriately, and the chaplain ends up filling in the blanks. So it's that combination, and you kind of see that in the writing, that you have a twofold thing there, that the inmate is to fill it out, but the chaplain is also there to make sure they understand what's going on with it. And at the end of it, we want to make sure they understand that there are requirements placed on them to observe the diet that they're saying they must have. And so that's the initial process.
Okay, and just so that I understand, you have the inmate signs a certification on the first page and then signs a more, certifies an even more detailed requirements on the second page.
The second page would be where the chaplain is going through it with the inmate to make sure that these points that are listed here are understood. And they go through together, and that's the point of the second page. I know there's redundancy, okay, and that redundancy is intended so that we don't have somebody leave who doesn't understand what happens tomorrow or the next day or further down the line.
Okay, and then on where the institutional chaplain or his or her designee, I presume, so there's only one institutional chaplain for each facility, I gather? Or do you all do circuit work, travel from?
Yeah, no, we don't have the transportation to do the circuit work right now, but there's one chaplain per institution for the major institutions. And
does the chaplain have assistants that could go through this?
Not at this point, unless we'd be talking about volunteers. But we don't feel this is the sort of activity that our volunteers would be immediately involved in.
And volunteers, you mean trustees in the prison system, or
citizen volunteers?
Okay. And then, what does the chaplain criteria does the chaplain use to? I reviewed the responses, and based on the sincerity assessment, I do or do not approve this inmate be eligible. What is the criteria that the chaplain uses?
To determine sincerity? That's a sort of a slippery issue, isn't it? The first thing we do in talking to the chaplains about sincerity is that we assume that since the inmate submits in writing a request to participate, that there's a level of sincerity. But why else would he sit down, or he or she sit down and write something out? And so the mere fact that the inmate puts in the form is a DC 6-236. It's a standard inmate request for all issues. But that's the beginning. The inmate sits down and fills out a DC 6-236. And we say, sincerity. We say, well, the inmate is going to be involved in the test, in the provision of the diet, in which we're telling him we're going to look at the way in which that inmate uses that diet, whether he participates in it, violates it, what his canteen purchases will be. And so that's a known. So there's the backup. And in between that, on the questions that are asked, we want them to have some kind of a reasonable approach. And we're not making a demand to say, this is part of your religion. We want it to be part of its religion, but we're not saying you have to have it written someplace else other than your mind. So consequently, we have numerous religions that are involved beyond Judaism itself that feel as though they have sincere beliefs. And that's what we're asking the chaplains to judge. I know it's not very clear, right?
No.
We feel the same way.
Okay.
I'd like to approach the witness and
Yes,
get
you
a
may.